The billionaire at the counter wasn't there for the coffee. He was there to see who would look him in the eye. In a frayed jacket and a two-day beard, he was running a test on his own empire, a hidden camera capturing every dismissal, every sneer from the staff he paid. Until a waitress with $4 in her pocket did the one thing he never expected. She bought him his meal. His name was Marcus Thorne, a man who built a billion-dollar restaurant chain on the idea of genuine hospitality. But a haunting doubt had grown in him. Was his empire, celebrated for its warmth, just another place where people were judged by their cover? So he designed an experiment, wearing a costume of poverty to walk into his own world unnoticed. The question wasn't just about who would be kind. It was about who, in his entire organization, was actually living the values he sold. The idea didn't come from a boardroom, but from a memory. 2 decades earlier, Marcus Thorne had been that man at the counter, broke, hungry, and invisible. A single act of kindness from a diner waitress who gave him a free meal and a $20 bill had been the spark that kept him going. He'd sworn to build a company that never forgot that feeling. But now, at the peak of his success, the reviews were telling a different story. His chain, the Hearthstone Group, spanned 127 restaurants across the country. It was celebrated for its community-first philosophy, a brand built on warm lighting, local art, and a mission statement etched into every menu, where everyone has a seat at the table. The annual revenue topped $800 million, but in the last fiscal year, a quiet trend had emerged in the customer feedback system. Complaints about rude service and elitist atmosphere had jumped by 40%. More damning were the internal reports from mystery shoppers, which noted that staff in higher-end locations were consistently scoring lower on inclusive hospitality metrics. Marcus dismissed it at first as growing pains. Then, 3 months ago, a video from a location in Chicago went semi-viral. It showed a hostess openly sighing and rolling her eyes at an elderly couple in outdated clothing, asking if they were sure they could afford to dine there. The corporate apology was swift. The hostess was fired, but the comment section was an open wound. One read, "This isn't one bad apple. This is what happens when a company cares more about its Instagram aesthetic than its soul." That comment kept Marcus awake. He built an empire on a promise. Was it now just a marketing slogan? His senior leadership team, led by his fiercely pragmatic COO, Vivian Shaw, argued it was just noise. "We have industry-leading profit margins and expansion targets, Marcus," she told him in a tense meeting. "You can't police every micro-interaction in a hospitality business. Some people are just having bad days." But Marcus couldn't let it go. He remembered the exact texture of the vinyl stool he'd sat on 20 years ago, the smell of grease and coffee, the way the waitress's hands were chapped, but her smile was real. He decided he needed to see the truth for himself, not through sanitized reports or curated store visits. He needed to become invisible. He called in his most trusted security head, a former private investigator named Leo. "I need to disappear into one of my own restaurants," Marcus said. "I need a disguise so good my own mother wouldn't recognize me, and I need to see how we treat someone who looks like they have nothing to give." Leo, to his credit, only nodded and asked for a budget. The plan, dubbed Project Looking Glass, was born. They selected 6 Hearthstone locations across 3 states, varying from upscale urban bistros to suburban family grills. Leo hired a professional makeup artist to age Marcus's face, add realistic stubble and dirt under the nails, and outfit him in thrift store clothes that smelled faintly of old paper and damp wool. The final touch was a pair of discreet, high-definition glasses with a built-in camera, streaming footage to a van parked nearby where Leo monitored everything. Marcus removed his $500,000 Patek Philippe watch, but at the last second, he slipped it back on his wrist, letting the leather band peek from the frayed sleeve. It was a subconscious tell, a tiny anchor to his real self, and a potential clue he didn't even realize he was leaving. The first test was in a sleek Hearthstone bistro in a wealthy downtown district. Marcus shuffled in, head down, and took a seat at the bar. The bartender, a man in his 20s with meticulously groomed hair, glanced over and then pointedly looked away, polishing a glass for a full 2 minutes before approaching. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat. Marcus asked for a glass of water. The bartender slid it across the bar without a word, then turned his back to take an order from a well-dressed couple who had just sat down, laughing easily with them. Marcus sat for 20 minutes. No one offered a menu. No one asked if he was waiting for someone. When he finally caught the eye of a passing server, she gave a tight, dismissive shake of her head and kept walking. He left, the untouched water glass sweating on the polished wood. The second location, a suburban grill, was worse. The hostess sniffed as he entered and said, "The restrooms are for customers only." When he said he was hopping to get a booth, she gestured vaguely toward the bar area. "You can sit there if you order something." The manager, a man with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently attached, circled near his stool the entire time, a silent, looming deterrent. Marcus ordered the cheapest soup. It arrived cold with a stale roll. He ate it in silence, surrounded by the cheerful noise of family dinners, feeling like a ghost in his own house. After 4 locations, the pattern was a hammer blow to his conscience. The kindness was transactional, reserved for those who looked the part. The mission statement was just words on a laminated card. In the surveillance van, Leo watched Marcus's shoulders slump further with each rejection. "We can call it, Marcus," Leo said over the covert earpiece after a server in the 5th restaurant had told Marcus he was loitering and asked him to leave. "You have your answer. It's breaking you." But Marcus insisted on the 6th and final location, the Hearthstone Cottage in a sleepy, middle-class town. It was the oldest model in the chain, the design that most resembled the original diner of his memory. He walked in, the bell on the door jingling, the smell of pie crust and roasted chicken washing over him. He took a seat at the counter, his usual spot in this experiment, and prepared for another performance of studied indifference. And that's when he met Chloe. She was 24 with her dark hair in a practical ponytail, her apron stained with what looked like blueberry syrup. She didn't sigh, she didn't look past him. She caught his eye and offered a warm, tired smile. "Long day?" she asked, placing a napkin and cutlery in front of him. Her voice was husky, as if she'd been talking over the lunch rush for hours. When he whispered that he wasn't sure he could afford anything, she simply said, "Let's start with some coffee on me. We've got a meatloaf special that'll stick to your ribs." For the next 20 minutes, she treated him like any other customer. She refilled his coffee without being asked. She told him the pie was apple cranberry and really good. When he finally admitted he had no money, her smile didn't falter. She glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in slightly. "Tell you what, my last table just left and tipped in cash. Their loss is your gain." She pulled 4 crumpled dollars from her own apron pocket and slid them across the counter to him. "This covers the special, and it's getting cold out tonight. You hang tight a second." She disappeared into the back and returned with a thick, worn fleece blanket from what looked like a lost and found bin. "It's clean," she said. "Just take it." In the van, Leo was silent. The footage showed the entire interaction in clear detail. Marcus, his disguise suddenly feeling like a lead weight, looked at the $4 and the blanket. This was the answer he'd been looking for, but it felt like a condemnation. He was about to speak, to perhaps reveal himself right there, when a shadow fell over the counter. The manager, a man named Derek Sloan, the same name from the corporate complaint files about aggressive cost-cutting and staff intimidation, had been watching from the pass-through window. He pushed through the kitchen door, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't address Marcus. He pointed a finger at Chloe. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was low, but it carried over the quiet hum of the restaurant. Chloe straightened up, her hands going to her apron. "He was hungry, Derek. I used my tip money." "That's not your money to give away. That food is inventory. That blanket is property." Derek's voice began to rise, drawing glances from the few remaining customers. "We are not a charity. We have a brand image to maintain. You think people want to eat next to this?" Marcus felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the same heat he felt reading the Chicago video comments. He watched as Chloe's face flushed, not with anger, but with a deep, humiliated shame. She looked at the floor. Derek snatched the $4 off the counter. "You're paying for that meal out of your paycheck, and you can clock out now. Consider this your final warning. One more stunt like this, and you're done. We don't need sentimental waitresses who can't understand basic business." Chloe nodded silently, her eyes glistening. She untied her apron, her movements slow and defeated. Marcus watched her, this woman who had just shown more of his company's stated soul than anyone he'd met in years, be broken down for it. The billionaire in the tattered jacket felt his two worlds, the memory of the hungry young man and the reality of the powerful CEO, collide with a seismic force. He stood up, the stool scraped loudly against the tile floor. Both Chloe and Derek turned to look at him. Derek's expression shifted from anger to annoyed impatience. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please sit down, or I'll have to ask you to leave." Marcus reached up, and with a deliberate pull, he removed the prosthetic nose and the gray-streaked stubble. He rubbed the makeup from around his eyes, the transformation shocking even under the warm diner lights. He looked directly at Derek, and then at the hidden camera lens in his glasses. "No," Marcus said, his real voice, clear and commanding, cutting through the quiet diner. "I think it concerns me quite a bit, because you, Derek, are speaking to the owner." For 5 full seconds, the only sound in the Hearthstone cottage was the hum of the refrigerated display case. Derek Sloane's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The angry flush drained away, leaving a waxy, bloodless pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Chloe took a stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a confusion so deep it bordered on fear. She wasn't looking at a homeless man anymore. She was looking at the face from the corporate training videos, the portrait in the annual report, and it was staring back at her from across a diner counter. Marcus ignored Derek. He kept his eyes on Chloe. "The meal you just paid for with your tips," he said, his voice softer now but no less intense. "And the blanket, that was the single most important transaction that has happened in any Hearthstone restaurant this year." He then turned the full force of his attention to the frozen manager. "Derek Sloane, my office, now not your office, mine, in New York. You have a flight in 3 hours. If you are not seated in the conference room by 9 a.m. tomorrow, you will be explaining your absence to our general counsel." He didn't wait for a response. He pulled out the cheap burner phone he'd been carrying for the disguise and dialed a number. "Leo, come in and bring the kit." Within 60 seconds, the diner door opened and Leo walked in, looking utterly out of place in his tactical jacket, carrying a small duffel bag. He went straight to Marcus, who was still at the counter. Without a word, Leo produced cleansing wipes and a mirror. Marcus methodically wiped away the remainder of the makeup, revealing the sharp, clean-shaven jawline of a billionaire. He took off the tattered jacket, and underneath was a simple but unmistakably expensive cashmere sweater. Finally, he slid the Patek Philippe watch fully from under the sleeve and fastened it properly on his wrist. The transformation was complete. The other 2 customers in the diner had stopped eating. A cook was peering through the pass-through window, spatula in hand. Marcus addressed the room, his CEO voice filling the space. "My apologies for the disruption. Everyone's meal tonight is on the Hearthstone group. Please enjoy." He then turned back to Chloe, who looked like she might bolt for the door at any second. "Chloe, a word, please, in private." He led her not to the manager's office, but to a small, rarely used banquet room at the back. Leo took up a position outside the door. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, Chloe stood rigidly, her arms wrapped around herself. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne," she blurted out before he could speak. "I didn't know it was you. I wouldn't have. I mean, the blanket was from Lost and Found. I shouldn't have given away company property, I just—" Marcus held up a hand. "Stop. You have nothing to apologize for. You did everything right, exactly right. You saw a person, not a problem. You are the only employee in 6 locations who did." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I need to understand something. Why did you do it?" Chloe slowly sank into a chair, her nervous energy seeming to leave her all at once, replaced by a profound exhaustion. She looked at her hands, at the small chemical burns from cleaning solutions and the chapped skin. "Because it was cold outside," she said quietly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And he looked hungry. I've been hungry." She shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. "It's just a few dollars." But Marcus, a man who read financial statements and market analyses for intuition, heard the story she wasn't telling in the hollows under her eyes and the weariness in her posture. "Tell me about the he you mentioned," Marcus pressed gently. "Your boyfriend, husband." A faint, sad smile touched Chloe's lips. "My brother, Danny, he's 17, he has challenges, autism. Our mom passed 2 years ago, it's just us." The story came out in quiet, matter-of-fact fragments. She worked double shifts at the Hearthstone and a weekend job at a laundromat to pay the rent on their small apartment and for Danny's specialized therapy, which their insurance didn't cover. The lost and found blanket she'd given Marcus was one she'd actually brought from home, knowing the nights were getting colder and someone might need it more than her sofa did. Marcus listened, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Here was an employee of his, living the very values he preached: compassion, community, carrying heavier loads than anyone should, and she was doing it while barely staying afloat. She was the soul of his company, and she was being managed by a man like Derek Sloan, who saw her kindness as a fireable offense. "Chloe," Marcus said, his voice thick, "you're not clocking out. You're coming to New York with me tonight. I want you in that meeting tomorrow." Panic flashed across her face. "Mr. Thorne, I can't. My brother, his routine." "Leo," Marcus called out. The door opened immediately. "We need a solution for Chloe's brother, Danny, for tonight and the next few days. Top priority." Leo nodded, already pulling out his phone. "It's handled, Chloe," Marcus said. "You have my word." Meanwhile, in the main diner, Derek Sloan was on his own phone in the manager's office, his voice a frantic, hushed whisper. "Vivian, it's Derek. He was here. Thorne, he was in disguise like a damn spy movie. I know, but the waitress, she fell for it, and now he's taking her to New York. He's firing me, I know it. You have to do something. You said this culture-first push was just PR. You said my numbers were all that mattered." The voice on the other end, COO Vivian Shaw, was ice cold. "Stop talking. Do not say another word. Get on that plane. Let me handle Thorne." Private jet touched down in New York just after midnight. Chloe, who had never been on any plane before, sat in stunned silence the whole way, staring out the window at the clouds below. Marcus spent the flight on his laptop, with Leo feeding him information. The preliminary report on Derek Sloan was damning. In his 18 months at the cottage, staff turnover had skyrocketed to 70%. 3 formal complaints for verbal harassment had been filed with HR and quietly dismissed. Vendor contracts had been mysteriously switched to a company owned by Sloan's brother-in-law at a 15% price increase. He was a toxin, but the question was he an anomaly? At 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus walked into the executive conference room on the top floor of the Hearthstone headquarters. The wall of glass looked out over the city. Seated at the table were a pale and sweating Derek Sloan, the stern head of HR, the general counsel, and Vivian Shaw. Vivian, in a razor-sharp suit, was the picture of calm competence. "Marcus, a dramatic stunt even for you," she said, a thin smile on her lips. "I've reviewed the footage from your adventure." While Mr. Sloan's language was regrettable, his point stands. We cannot have employees giving away inventory and misappropriating property based on personal sentiment. It sets a dangerous precedent. Marcus didn't sit. He placed his hands on the table and leaned forward. "You've reviewed the footage, Vivian. Did you review the footage from the other 5 locations? Did you see our employees, the people you manage, treating a human being like garbage? Did you see the consistent, systemic failure of our core mission?" Vivian's smile didn't waver. "We're in the hospitality business, Marcus, not the charity business. Our metrics focus on revenue per seat, table turnover, and cost efficiency. Sloan's location has the 3rd highest profit margin in the region. His methods, while unpolished, get results." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said, his voice dropping dangerously low. He gestured to Leo, who tapped a tablet. On the large screen at the end of the room, a graph appeared. "These are the long-term metrics. Sloan's location has high short-term profit, but it also has the highest customer attrition rate. People don't come back. The negative word of mouth, quantified by our social listening tools, has eroded the local brand value by an estimated 20% over his tenure. He's not building a business, he's burning it for kindling to make a quick, hot fire. And you," he said, turning his gaze fully to Vivian, "you have been incentivizing it. Your bonus structure rewards margin above all else. You have created a system where a Derek Sloan is not a bug, Vivian. He is the ideal outcome." The room went silent. Vivian's composure finally cracked, a flicker of anger in her eyes. Before she could respond, the door opened. Chloe, wearing clean clothes Leo's team had provided, stood there hesitantly. Everyone turned to look at her. "You asked me to come, Mr. Thorne," she said softly. "Come in, Chloe," Marcus said. "Sit next to me." As she did, Marcus addressed the table. "This is Chloe. Last night she demonstrated more understanding of our company's supposed values than anyone in this room, myself included. She is the benchmark." Derek Sloan, Marcus said, turning to the manager, who looked like he wanted to vanish into his chair. You are fired. Effective immediately, you will be escorted from the building. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the vendor contract fraud and the suppressed HR complaints. Sloan stood up, his chair screeching, and left without a word, a security agent falling into step beside him. Marcus then turned to the head of HR. Every dismissed complaint from Sloan's location is to be reopened. Every employee who left is to be contacted for an exit interview. I want a full audit. Finally, he looked at Vivian. You are suspended, pending a full review of your compensation policies and their impact on company culture. The board will be notified within the hour. Vivian stood, her face a mask of cold fury. You're making a sentimental mistake, Marcus. The market doesn't care about kindness. It cares about earnings per share. We'll see, Marcus replied. After the others had filed out, leaving only Marcus and Chloe, he turned to her. I have a proposal for you, Chloe. I don't want to just give you a reward. I want to hire you for a new role, Director of Culture and Community Impact. You'll help me tear down the system that created Derek Sloan and build a new one. Your first task, designing a training program based on what you did last night. The salary is $180,000 a year, with full benefits for you and your brother. Chloe stared at him, tears finally spilling over. She shook her head. I don't know anything about being a director. I'm a waitress. You know everything about being human, Marcus said. That's the only qualification that matters for this job. Will you try? She nodded, unable to speak. The story should have ended there. A wrong righted, a good person rewarded, a toxic manager fired. It was the perfect undercover boss finale. And for a week it was. Press releases went out. Chloe and her brother were moved to a secure, comfortable apartment in the city. The internal announcement about Vivian's suspension and the new culture initiative sent shockwaves through the company. But Vivian Shaw was not a woman who accepted defeat. From her suspended accounts, she used a private server to access old files. She was looking for leverage, for anything to undermine Marcus's moral crusade, and she found it. It was a cluster of emails from 5 years ago, from a region where Marcus had closed 3 underperforming locations. The closures had put 200 people out of work. The local news had covered it, quoting employees who felt betrayed by the community-first company. In one email Marcus had written to her, "The heart is a luxury the balance sheet cannot always afford. Proceed with the closures, do it fast and clean." It was a cold, corporate statement, the kind every CEO has to write, but out of context, paired with the viral video of his dramatic reveal as a billionaire savior, it was dynamite. Vivian anonymously leaked the email to a business gossip blog known for takedowns. The headline exploded by lunchtime: Hearthstone hypocrite, billionaire CEO preaches kindness after ruthlessly axing hundreds. The article juxtaposed his words to Chloe with his old email about the heart being a luxury. The narrative was perfect. A wealthy man performing a morality play to cover his own cutthroat history. Marcus's phone began to ring off the hook. Board members were furious. The positive press from Project Looking Glass vaporized, replaced by accusations of staggering hypocrisy. Online, the conversation shifted from praising Chloe to mocking Marcus. Memes appeared of him in his disguise with the caption, "The heart is a luxury, unless it's good PR." Sitting in his office, watching the crisis unfold on multiple screens, Marcus felt the ground crumbling beneath him. He had wanted to expose the truth about his company. He hadn't realized the hardest truth to expose would be about himself. He had made a business decision years ago, a hard one he still believed was necessary. But now, it was being used to poison the very change he was trying to create. Leo entered, his face grim. The blog won't reveal the source, but the tech trace points back to a proxy server that was accessed from Vivian's home IP address an hour before the leak. Marcus nodded. It was a tactical move from a wounded opponent, but this wasn't just a boardroom battle anymore. The scandal was a wildfire, and it was threatening to burn down everything, including the new, fragile future he'd just offered Chloe. She would be seen not as a hero, but as a pawn in a billionaire's image repair campaign. He looked at the live news feed. A reporter was outside the Hearthstone cottage, interviewing customers. "Do you think it was all a publicity stunt?" the reporter asked. Marcus knew he had one move left, but it was a nuclear option. He had to face the public, not as a CEO giving a press conference, but as the man who had sat at that counter. And he had to do it before the story hardened into a permanent, damning narrative. He picked up the phone. "Lee," he said, his voice steady with a new resolve. "Call every major network. Tell them I'm giving one interview live in 1 hour, no pre-submitted questions, and get me a car. I'm not doing it from this tower." He was going back to where it started. The live truck satellite dishes were already sprouting like metal mushrooms in the Hearthstone Cottage parking lot when Marcus's car pulled in. He hadn't chosen the corporate headquarters or a sterile studio. He was standing on the cracked asphalt of the very place where his experiment had begun, the diner's neon sign buzzing overhead. Inside, Chloe was waiting, looking out at the media scrum with an expression of pure dread. "You don't have to do this with me," Marcus had told her. Her reply was simple: "If it's about the truth, then I do." They set up at the same counter where they'd first met, 2 microphones between them, a bank of cameras pointing through the window. The interview was being carried live by a major cable news network and streamed online. The anchor, a woman known for her incisive style, began not with a question, but with a statement. She read the leaked email aloud in a clear, cold voice. "The heart is a luxury the balance sheet cannot always afford." She looked at Marcus. "So which is the real you, Mr. Thorne? The man who said that 5 years ago, or the man performing this very public act of contrition today?" Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone. "They're both me. That's the hardest part to explain. 5 years ago, I had to close 3 restaurants. The locations were failing, losing millions, and the model was unsustainable. Letting 200 people go was the worst night of my professional life. That email was me trying to be a CEO, to make a brutal but necessary decision so the other 10,000 employees could keep their jobs. I wrote it feeling like a monster. I signed those termination letters feeling like a monster, but I believed it was surgery to save the patient." He paused, letting the admission hang in the air. "What I didn't understand then was that the surgery itself was a symptom of a deeper disease. I had built a system, with the help of people like my former COO, that valued efficiency over humanity. We celebrated managers like Derek Sloan because they made the numbers look good in the short term, while they were slowly poisoning the well. That email isn't proof of my hypocrisy. It's proof of my failure. A failure I only saw when I sat at this counter and saw my own company through the eyes of someone it was designed to ignore." The anchor shifted her gaze to Chloe. "Ms. Fernandez, you're at the center of this. Do you feel used, like a prop in a public relations campaign to clean up his image?" Chloe, her hands clasped tightly on the counter, took a slow breath. "A week ago, I was scared I'd lose my job for giving a hungry man a meal. My brother and I were one missed paycheck away from a lot of hard choices. Now, because Mr. Thorne saw what I did, I have a chance I never dreamed of. But what you're asking, it's the wrong question." She looked directly into the camera, her voice gaining strength. "The question isn't whether he's using me. The question is, what is he using me for? If he's using my story to actually change things, to make sure no one else is treated the way I saw him treated, or the way I was treated by my manager, then use me, please. Because the way things were going wasn't working for anyone but the people at the very top." Her raw honesty sent a visible ripple through the reporters outside. The anchor, momentarily thrown, pressed on. "But the leaked email suggests a pattern of ruthless behavior. How can employees trust this isn't just another temporary gesture?" This time, Marcus answered, "They shouldn't trust my words. They should watch my actions and hold me accountable to them." He then did something unplanned. He pulled a document from his briefcase. It was a corporate bylaw amendment. "As of this morning, I've filed with the board to create a new class of stock, a culture share. 1% of all company equity will be placed in a trust governed by a council of employees elected by their peers from across all levels of the company. Not management, line cooks, servers, dishwashers, hosts. That council will have veto power over any policy that impacts company culture and direct oversight of the new Culture and Community Impact Department, which Chloe will help lead. If I or any future CEO tries to backslide, they will have the legal authority to stop it." The announcement was a bomb. It was an unprecedented transfer of power. On the live stream, the comments section exploded. The narrative began to fracture, some calling it a brilliant, genuine move, others a desperate stunt. But the momentum of the pure hypocrisy story had been broken. Back at headquarters, Vivian Shaw watched the interview on a muted monitor in her emptied office. Her expression was stone. The plan had been to force Marcus to retreat, to discredit him so the board would reinstate her to steady the ship. Instead, he had doubled down in the most radical way possible. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Audit trail leads to you. They know about the vendor kickbacks too. Lawyer up." She deleted the text and powered off the phone. It was over, but as she prepared to leave, her assistant stepped in, looking nervous. "Ms. Shaw, a Mr. Leo is here with security." The fallout, however, was just beginning to mutate. While the interview changed the media conversation, it unleashed a different beast online. Chloe, now a public figure, became a target. In the darker corners of social media, conspiracy threads popped up. They claimed she was an actress, that the entire encounter was scripted. They zoomed in on the original footage, focusing on the brief glimpse of Marcus's luxury watch. He wanted to be caught, they declared. The watch was a plant to make the reveal more dramatic. The narrative of a cynical, orchestrated PR stunt found a fervent, angry audience. Worse were the personal attacks on Chloe. Comments dug into her past, mocked her family situation, accused her of exploiting her autistic brother for sympathy. Anonymous messages flooded her new social media accounts, calling her a gold digger and a traitor to the working class. The immense kindness she had shown was now being weaponized to paint her as a naive fool or a conniving opportunist. Leo brought the worst of it to Marcus. "She shouldn't see this," Marcus said, rage simmering. "We need to get her offline, protect her." But when he went to Chloe's new apartment to suggest exactly that, he found her at the kitchen table, her brother Danny quietly assembling a puzzle beside her. She was reading the comments on a tablet, tears streaming down her face, but she was reading them. "They're saying I'm a liar," she whispered. Marcus knelt beside her chair. "Chloe, look at me. You don't have to subject yourself to this. We have people who can handle it." She shook her head, wiping her cheeks. "No, if I hide from it, then they win. They get to define me without me even being there. That's what always happens to people like me. We get talked about, but we never get to talk back." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I want to talk back." The next day, Chloe asked Leo to film her, not in a studio, but in the small, sunny living room of her new apartment, with Danny in the background. She posted the video directly online. She didn't address the conspiracy theories. She spoke to the people who had shared stories of their own struggles, who had been ignored or mistreated at work. "I see you," she said, "and this isn't about a billionaire or a watch. It's about the fact that for a long time, a lot of us have felt invisible. At work, in stores, walking down the street. If this whole messed up situation makes one person think twice before treating someone else like they're invisible, then all this nasty noise is worth it." She then put her arm around her brother. "And for the record, my brother Danny is the strongest, coolest person I know. He's not a prop, he's my heart. And yeah, I'd sell my last $4 to make sure he, or anyone, gets a meal and a blanket when they need it. Because that's not charity, that's just being a person." The video did what polished PR could not. It was authentic, vulnerable, and fiercely human. It went massively viral, shared with captions like, "This is the real story." The public sentiment, capricious as ever, swung hard in her favor. The Chloe principle became a shorthand online for choosing empathy in small, personal actions. Yet just as Marcus felt the crisis turning a corner, Leo delivered the next piece of bad news. The internal forensic audit, spurred by Derek Sloan's firing, had followed the money. It didn't just stop at Sloan's brother-in-law. The trail of inflated vendor contracts, phantom service fees, and redirected rebates formed a spiderweb. And at the center of that web was not Vivian Shaw alone. The financials pointed to a silent partner, a shell company that had been siphoning funds from the Hearthstone Group for years. That shell company was traced back to a private equity firm, one that had been quietly accumulating Hearthstone stock. Leo laid the documents on Marcus's desk. "It wasn't just about culture or power, Marcus. It was a takeover. Vivian was weakening the company from the inside, running up costs, eroding morale to depress stock value, making it ripe for a buyout at a bargain price." Her bonus was a pittance compared to what she stood to gain from the firm she was feeding. Marcus stared at the papers, the scale of the betrayal settling in his bones. His COO hadn't just been a philosophical opponent, she had been a corporate saboteur. The closed restaurants, the toxic managers, the suppressed complaints, they weren't just failures of culture. They were tactics in a deliberate financial siege. The leaked email was a last-ditch weapon in that war. He had been fighting a battle over the soul of his company, while his opponent had been fighting a war for its corpse. This changed everything. This wasn't a crisis he could solve with an interview or a new employee council. This was a legal and financial battlefield that threatened the company's very existence. If this got out before he contained it, the stock would plummet, the board would panic, and the vultures would circle. He looked out at the city, the headquarters of the private equity firm visible in the distance. A cold, focused clarity replaced the emotional turmoil of the past weeks. The mission was no longer just about building a kinder company. It was about surviving long enough to do so. "Leo," Marcus said, his voice quiet and steel, "get the full audit report to the Securities and Exchange Commission and schedule a call with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District. We're not dealing with a disgruntled executive anymore. We are going to war." The war Marcus Thorne declared wasn't fought in the press or on social media. It was fought in sealed courtrooms and through forensic accounting ledgers. While the public was still debating whether his transformation was real, federal investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice were quietly building a case that would become one of the largest corporate fraud and embezzlement prosecutions in the restaurant industry's history. Vivian Shaw was arrested at her home at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The charges were numerous: wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, and commercial bribery. The private equity firm, Crestfall Partners, was also indicted. Their scheme, as laid out in the 80-page indictment, was breathtaking in its cynicism. They had installed Vivian as COO a year prior with the sole purpose of intentionally degrading the Hearthstone Group's operations and morale to depress its stock price, allowing Crestfall to launch a hostile takeover at a fire sale price. The inflated vendor contracts, the punitive policies that drove away good employees, the suppression of complaints. It was all a coordinated effort to hollow out the company from within. Derek Sloan, facing his own charges for fraud and tax evasion, turned state's evidence. He provided emails and recorded conversations that implicated Vivian and Crestfall directly. In exchange for his testimony, he received a reduced sentence of 18 months in federal prison. Vivian Shaw, at her sentencing, stood before the judge and showed no remorse, stating she had simply been playing the game of capitalism at its highest level. She was sentenced to 7 years. The financial restitution was staggering. Crestfall Partners was forced to disgorge $12 million in ill-gotten gains and paid a $25 million fine. A portion of that money was used to create a restitution fund for the employees who had been wrongfully terminated or driven out by the toxic culture Vivian and her proxies had cultivated. For Marcus, the victory was bitter. He had saved his company, but the cost was the revelation of a rot he had been oblivious to for years. The board, terrified by the scandal and newly aware of their own lack of oversight, unanimously approved the creation of the Culture Share Trust. Power, in a tangible, legal form, began to shift. Amid the legal maelstrom, Chloe was doing her job. With a team of frontline employees from across the country, she designed the Chloe Principal Training Program. It wasn't about scripted greetings or upselling techniques. It was built around a simple, radical module called The Counter. Using anonymized footage from Marcus's original experiment, not just from her diner, but from the 5 that failed, employees were walked through the moments of decision. Where do you look? What do you assume? What does our mission statement actually mean when someone walks in who doesn't look like our target customer? The training rolled out to every general manager and then to every staff member. For the first time, the people serving the food were given the authority to make small, compassionate decisions without fear of reprisal from a manager like Derek Sloan. A year to the day after Marcus had first walked into the Hearthstone cottage, he returned. The neon sign was gone. In its place was a new, simpler sign that read The Counter. Below it, in smaller letters, a Hearthstone kitchen. The interior was brighter, the staff wore different uniforms, and at the center of the menu was a bold print statement: "One meal, one kindness, one community. Pay what you can for the neighbor's plate." The official reopening was a quiet affair. The media had moved on. Marcus sat at the same stool. Chloe, now the director of culture, served him a cup of coffee. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was there to observe the new team. They watched as an elderly man came in, looking uncertain, and was greeted not with pity but with normalcy by a young server. The man ordered the neighbor's plate. The server simply said, "Excellent choice," and rang it up at $0 without a flicker of judgment. "It's working," Chloe said, a quiet awe in her voice. "It's a start," Marcus replied. He then slid a small velvet box across the counter to her. "This isn't a bonus, and it's not from the company, it's from me." Chloe opened the box. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a key. Attached to it was a small engraved tag that read Unit 14, 447 West Street. "It's an apartment," Marcus said, "but not for you. It's for your brother Danny, a permanent supported living community for adults with autism. It has 24-hour staff, job training programs, and it's paid for in full forever. It's his no matter what happens to the company or to you or to me. It's a place where he can be independent and safe and happy, so you never have to choose between his future and yours again." Chloe stared at the key, her eyes flooding with tears. This was a different kind of kindness, one that saw the whole picture of her life and addressed its deepest fear. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, clutching the box to her chest. Marcus smiled. "Good. Now, I have a board meeting in an hour. We are voting on expanding the Neighbor's Plate program to 20 locations." As he stood to leave, Chloe finally found her voice. "Marcus, wait," she pointed to his wrist. "Your watch, the famous watch from the video, you're not wearing it." Marcus glanced at his bare wrist. He gave a small, almost sheepish shrug. "I sold it last month, the Patek Philippe. It fetched just over 400,000 at auction." Chloe was stunned. "Why?" "Because the Culture Share Trust needed a founding endowment that wasn't tied to company stock or vulnerable to board disputes. So I liquidated a personal asset. It felt appropriate. That watch was the clue in the thumbnail that made everyone play detective. Now its value is doing something real." He paused at the door. $4 started this, Chloe. 400,000 will help protect it." The final surprising detail emerged not from a courtroom, but from a historical audit. As the new employee council began its work, they requested all old personnel files to understand the roots of the company's culture. In a dusty archive box from the very first Hearthstone diner, the one that had inspired Marcus decades ago, they found a faded Employee of the Month certificate. The name on it was Angela Flores. The photo showed a young waitress with a bright, familiar smile. Chloe, reviewing the scanned documents, stopped cold. She pulled up a picture of her own mother, who had passed away when Chloe was a teenager. She showed it to Marcus. There was no mistaking it. The waitress who had given a broke, hungry Marcus Thorne a free meal and $20 25 years ago was Chloe's mother. The kindness that had inspired an empire had flowed directly from her family to his, a circle neither of them could have ever imagined. Chloe hadn't just been living her company's values, she had been continuing her mother's legacy. Marcus, upon learning this, sat in his office for a long time, staring at the two pictures side by side on his screen. It was a coincidence that felt like fate, a truth more profound than any lesson he had tried to teach. The world wasn't just connected by transactions or corporate structures. It was connected by invisible threads of decency passed hand to hand across generations. At the next all-hands meeting, Marcus shared the story with the entire company. He didn't frame it as a miracle or a marketing angle. He framed it as proof. "Compassion isn't a line item," he said. "It's an inheritance, and it's the only thing that builds something that lasts." The Hearthstone Group, now a blend of for-profit restaurants and non-profit community kitchens, stabilized and then began to grow again, not in sheer number of locations, but in depth of community impact. The undercover billionaire story, once a scandal-tinged viral moment, faded into business case study lore. But in the towns where a Hearthstone restaurant became the counter, the change was tangible. It was in the single mother who got a hot meal after a double shift, no questions asked. It was in the veteran who found a job washing dishes because the manager was trained to see potential, not just a resume gap. It was in the thousands of small human interactions that no longer happened under the shadow of fear or judgment. Marcus Thorne never went undercover again. He didn't need to. He had built a system where the truth could reach him, carried by the voices of the very people he had once paid to serve. And Chloe Fernandez, the waitress with $4 in her pocket, became the guardian of that system, ensuring the heart of the company was never again treated as a luxury. Their story, which began with a test of character, ended with the understanding that the real test wasn't for the employees. It was for the man at the top, and for the first time in a long time, he felt he was passing. So what is the real lesson of the billionaire in the homeless disguise? It's not the feel-good story of a waitress rewarded, though that's part of it. It's not the dramatic downfall of corrupt executives, though that provided justice. The lesson is about the architecture of empathy itself, how it's systematically trained out of us, and how it can be built back in. Marcus Thorne's experiment began with a simple, painful question: does my world see people? The answer at first was a resounding no. His restaurants, like so many spaces in our culture, had become efficiency engines where human judgment was a liability. People were assessed in seconds by their clothes, their posture, their perceived value, and sorted accordingly. This isn't just a business failure, it's a human one. Psychological research tells us this behavior is learnable. We can be conditioned to see need as nuisance, to view difference as threat, especially when the systems we work in reward us for doing so. But Chloe's action, that instinct to share her last $4 and a blanket, proves something else, that the wiring for compassion is still there, often strongest in those who have known struggle themselves. Studies confirm that individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds frequently demonstrate greater altruism and a finer attunement to others' emotions. It's a survival skill that becomes a moral one. Chloe wasn't following a corporate policy. She was following a deeper, more fundamental rule: when someone is cold and hungry, you help. The seismic shift in this story was Marcus's reveal. It was what he chose to do with the uncomfortable truth he uncovered. He didn't just fire a bad manager or give a heroic waitress a check. He dismantled the incentive structure that created the Derek Sloans and empowered the Chloe Fernandezes. He transferred real, legal power to the people on the front lines, the ones who actually set the temperature of human interaction every day. He sold his own watch to fund it. That is the radical part, the recognition that values without power are just poetry. And then the final, breathtaking twist of fate. The kindness that saved Marcus a lifetime ago came from Chloe's own mother. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a demonstration. Compassion is a chain. A single act sends ripples forward through time, touching lives in ways you will never see. The $20 from Angela Flores built a billion-dollar company. The $4 from her daughter saved its soul. The chain only breaks if we refuse to be the next link. We live in a world that constantly asks us to make snap judgments, to optimize, to look past what's inconvenient. This story asks us to do the opposite, to look twice, to pause, to understand that the person who seems to have nothing might be carrying everything, and the person with everything might be spiritually bankrupt. The real disguise isn't the billionaire's tattered jacket. It's the armor we all wear that lets us walk past each other without really seeing. Marcus and Chloe's story is ultimately about removing that armor, brick by brick, policy by policy, choice by choice. It's a reminder that changing a culture isn't about a memo from the top. It's about building a system where the best of human nature, so often found in the quiet corners and the kindest gestures, is protected, amplified, and made the new bottom line. What would you see if you looked past the surface? And what system are you building or upholding with your choices every day? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in stories that dig for deeper truths, subscribe. There's always more beneath the surface.